The morning they discharged me from Sunridge Manor, it was raining the way it only rains in November in British Columbia. Not hard, not dramatic, just a slow gray persistence that soaks through everything eventually. A care worker named Bev held an umbrella over my head while my nephew loaded my 2 bags into the back of his truck. I stood on the wet pavement and looked back at the building, at those cream-colored walls, and the little garden they said was for residents, the one they never let me use without signing a form first. 14 months, I breathed in the cold air. 14 months since my daughter-in-law had me placed there. 14 months since my son had signed the papers. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me, standing there in the rain. The anger had burned itself clean somewhere around month 8. What was left felt quieter than anger, more patient, more certain. They had no idea what they'd set in motion. Let me tell you who I was before all of this, because it matters. My name is Hugh McGuire. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working in commercial real estate in the Lower Mainland. Not selling condos, but the unglamorous end of it. Industrial properties, warehouses, land assembly. I built a modest business, McGuire Property Holdings, out of an office above a dry cleaner in Burnaby when I was 34 years old. By the time my son was grown, that business owned 6 commercial properties outright and had interests in 4 more through a partnership with a firm in Surrey. I was not a wealthy man by Vancouver standards. No one reasonable is anymore. But I had built something real. Something that took decades of early mornings and missed holidays and more spreadsheets than I care to remember. My wife Irene passed 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosis to funeral in 7 months. After that, it was just me and my son, Owen. Owen was 34 when everything happened. He worked in my business, had since he was 26. I'd brought him in deliberately, slowly, taught him everything I knew. I wanted him to carry it forward. I wanted there to be a reason I'd spent all those years building. He met Simone at a conference in Calgary. She was in property management, smart, well-dressed, knew the vocabulary of the industry. I liked her well enough at first. She was sharp, she asked good questions, but there was something in the way she cataloged things when she came to the house. Not admiring exactly, assessing. I noticed it. I told myself I was being an overprotective widower. I should have trusted that instinct. They married 3 years after they met. Small ceremony, nice enough. I gave a toast. I meant every word of it. I still have the card Owen gave me that night, tucked into a book on my nightstand. Dad, you gave me everything. I'm going to make you proud. I read it once in month 4 at Sunridge, and then I put it face down and didn't read it again. The trouble began gradually, the way serious trouble usually does. About 18 months before my placement, Simone started coming to the office more. Not just dropping by, sitting in on meetings, asking to be CC'd on correspondence, proposing that she take over some of the client relationships I'd maintained for 20 years. Owen presented it as efficiency, as modernizing. I let some of it go. I wasn't 20 years old. I knew I couldn't hold on to everything forever. But then she brought in a consultant, a man named Rafe, who specialized in family business transitions. Owen said it was just planning for the future. The consultant sat across from me in my own boardroom and talked about cognitive succession and capacity assessments. And I remember thinking, I am 65 years old. I run 5 kilometers 3 times a week. I managed 3 property closings last quarter. What exactly is he assessing? I found out 2 months later. The consultant's report, which I was not supposed to see. My office manager, Paulette, accidentally forwarded it to me along with a batch of files, described me as showing signs of early-stage executive function decline and reduced capacity for complex financial decision-making. It recommended a formal review of my role in the business, suggested that a power of attorney might be appropriate to formalize business continuity. I read that document 3 times sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold. Then I called my lawyer. His name is Terence Ouellette, and he has been my lawyer for 22 years. He is the kind of man who speaks slowly and thinks faster than anyone in the room. When I read him the key passages over the phone, there was a pause. Hugh, he said, don't sign anything. Don't agree to any assessments arranged by Owen or Simone. And do me a favor, start keeping notes. I started keeping notes that evening. 3 weeks later, Owen sat me down in my own living room and told me he was worried about me. He said he'd noticed I was forgetful. He said Simone had seen me confused at a family dinner. I hadn't been confused, I'd been tired. There's a difference, and I'd told him so. He said he'd consulted with my family doctor, which he had no right to do under any interpretation of my medical privacy, and that my doctor had expressed some concerns. I called my doctor the next morning. She told me she had expressed no such concerns. I wrote that down. Owen asked me, gently, if I would be willing to have a formal cognitive assessment done, just to put everyone's minds at ease. He suggested a clinic in Langley that Simone had apparently researched. I declined. He asked again 2 weeks later, with Simone present this time. She touched my hand when she spoke. She said she loved me like a father. She said this was about protecting me. I looked at her hand on mine and thought about Terrence's advice, and I said very calmly that I appreciated their concern, but that I had full confidence in my own faculties and that I would be making my own medical decisions going forward. The look that passed between them when I said that, just a flicker, half a second, told me everything I needed to know about what came next. What came next was a Section 59 application under the Adult Guardianship Act. If you don't know what that is, I'll explain it simply. It is a legal mechanism by which a person can be declared incapable of managing their own affairs and placed under the supervision of a guardian. It is meant to protect vulnerable adults from exploitation. The cruelest irony of my situation is that it was used against me by the very people it was designed to protect me from. Owen and Simone filed the application in February. They submitted the consultant's report, a letter from a physician I had seen once for a shoulder strain who apparently had concerns about my affect and orientation. I have never, to this day, been able to determine what he based that on, and statements from two people I had considered family friends who said they had observed me behaving oddly at social occasions. I was not told about the application until the interim order had already been granted. My son had had me legally declared incapable. The business, the properties, the accounts, all frozen pending a formal capacity review. And because the application included a residential care component citing concerns about my ability to live safely alone, I was placed at Sunridge Manor in Abbotsford while the review was pending. I remember the drive there. Owen drove. Simone sat in the passenger seat. I sat in the back with a bag I had been given 40 minutes to pack. We didn't speak for most of the drive. At one point, Simone turned around and told me that this was the best thing for everyone. I looked out the window at the Fraser Valley and didn't answer. When they left me in the lobby, Owen hugged me. I let him. I didn't hug him back. Sunridge Manor was not a cruel place. I want to be fair about that. The staff were decent people doing a difficult job. There was a man on my floor named Cecil who was 91 and had the driest sense of humor I'd ever encountered, and we played cribbage twice a week. There was a garden I eventually got access to, a good library, a television lounge where they played hockey on Friday nights. But I was not supposed to be there. That distinction, being somewhere you're not supposed to be, does something to a person. It is a low, continuous hum of wrongness that never quite lets you rest. Every morning I woke up and the wrongness was there before anything else, before memory almost. Owen and Simone came to visit in the first month. They brought flowers. Simone talked about renovations they were doing to the house. My house, the house Irene and I had bought in 1997, which was apparently now the base of their operations while they managed the business transition. Owen told me the business was doing fine. He used that word, transition, the way the consultant had, like it was a neutral bureaucratic word and not a description of what had been taken from me. I asked Owen in front of Simone whether he had arranged the shoulder physician's report. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. I told him I had spoken to Terrence Ouellette about everything. I watched his face. "Dad," he said, "let's not make this adversarial." I looked at my son, my boy, the one I had taught to drive in a parking lot in Coquitlam, the one I had sat with in the hospital when he had his appendix out at 17, the one I had handed a business to, and I thought, "You already made it adversarial." The paperwork was filed in February. After that first visit, I didn't see them for 6 weeks. When they came back, I declined to see them. The staff relayed my message. Owen stood in the hallway outside my room for a few minutes. I could hear him, and then he left. I declined every visit after that. Every month, one or both of them showed up. Every month I said no. I had things to do. What they didn't know, what I hadn't told Owen because I had sensed years before that things were shifting in ways I didn't fully understand, was that I had already restructured my holdings. 18 months before the application, when Rafe the consultant first appeared and something cold moved through my gut, I had a conversation with Terrence. A quiet, careful, hypothetical conversation about what it would look like if someone wanted to protect their assets from an unexpected legal challenge. About what structures existed under Canadian business law. About trusts. We spent 4 months setting it up. The business Owen and Simone thought they were managing, the one the guardianship order gave them access to, was a shell. The operating accounts, yes. The day-to-day income from the properties, yes. But the properties themselves, the equity, the real asset, those had been transferred to a discretionary family trust 14 months before the application was filed. The trust had 3 trustees, Terrence, my nephew Patrick, and a chartered accountant in Victoria named Sylvia who had done my corporate taxes for 8 years. I was the sole beneficiary. Owen and Simone were running a business that owned nothing. Terrence had advised me not to tell anyone, and I had followed his advice to the letter. Not Owen, not Paulette, not even my brother-in-law, who I trust completely, no one. I lay in my room at Sunridge in the evenings, and sometimes I would take out the trust document. Terrence had brought me a copy in a visit that Simone didn't know about, and I would read it the way other people read scripture. Not for information, for steadiness. The formal capacity assessment happened in month 4. 2 psychologists, a physician, and a social worker. 6 hours over 2 days. I was cooperative. I was measured. I answered every question carefully and completely. I told them, without dramatizing it, what had happened. The consultant's report I wasn't supposed to see. The physician I had seen once for a shoulder. The statements from people I had barely known. I gave them the name of my own physician, who had by that point submitted a letter on my behalf stating clearly that she had no concerns about my cognitive capacity. I also gave them Terrence's contact information. The assessment took 8 weeks to finalize. The conclusion: no meaningful evidence of cognitive impairment. Recommendation: the guardianship order be reviewed and the residential care component reconsidered immediately. Owen and Simone contested it. They filed an objection claiming the assessment was compromised by my relationship with Terrence and that I had presented a misleading account of events. They produced a second opinion from another physician. They brought in Rafe again. So we went to the BC Supreme Court. I want to tell you about that hearing because I think about it often. Terrence stood up in that courtroom and laid out methodically everything that had happened. The consultant report I wasn't supposed to see. The physician who had met me once. The statements from acquaintances. He brought in my actual doctor. He brought in the assessment results. And then, quietly, almost as an aside, he introduced the trust documents. He explained that the assets my son believed he was managing did not in fact exist under the structure the guardianship order assumed. He explained that the business had been restructured legally and properly 18 months before any application was filed. He laid it out so plainly that the courtroom got very still. Owen's lawyer asked for an adjournment. The judge denied it. I sat in that courtroom and looked at my son across the room. He was looking at the documents Terrence had submitted. I watched him understand, not all at once but in stages, like a man reading a sentence he has to read 3 times before it lands. What had been in place the whole time, what he had never controlled, what all of this had been for nothing. He looked up and found my eyes. I looked back at him. I didn't look away and I didn't say anything, and after a moment he was the one who dropped his gaze. The guardianship order was vacated. Costs awarded against Owen and Simone. The court found the original application had been pursued without sufficient evidentiary basis and noted, in terms that were diplomatically careful but unmistakable, that the filing had not appeared to be motivated primarily by concern for my well-being. The civil fraud proceeding, which Terrence filed separately, targeting the misuse of the business's operating accounts during the 14 months I was at Sunridge, is still ongoing as I'm recording this. Terrence tells me to be patient. I have learned, in the past 14 months, that I am more patient than I knew. What I can tell you is this: the properties are mine. The trust is intact. The business, such as it is after a year of Owen and Simone running it without actually owning anything, is being wound down and reorganized on my terms. Paulette came back. The clients I'd had for 15 years, most of them, came back too. Owen and Simone have separated, which I learned from my nephew and did not ask about further. Owen left me a voicemail 2 months after the court decision. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't understood what Simone had planned. He said he had made the worst mistake of his life. I saved the voicemail. I haven't called back. I'm not sure I ever will. I'm not sure it matters. What I know is this: my son looked at what his father had built over 31 years and saw something to take rather than something to carry forward. And Simone saw it before he did and pointed him toward it, but he walked there himself. He signed the papers. He drove me to Sunridge. He stood in that lobby and let me walk away with a bag I packed in 40 minutes. I don't know how you come back from that. Maybe you don't. Maybe the grace in it is accepting that some things, once done, don't have a return. The house needed work when I moved back in November. They'd repainted the living room a color Irene would have hated. A cold gray, the kind that makes everything look like a waiting room. I'm going to paint it back this spring. A warm cream, something close to what it was. Cecil from Sunridge called me last week. His daughter found my number and gave it to him. We talked for 40 minutes about hockey and about nothing in particular. And when we hung up, I sat for a while in the kitchen without turning on any lights. I have rebuilt before. I know how it goes. It is slow and it is not romantic, and some mornings the wrongness is still there when you wake up. Quieter now, but present. Some mornings I stand in the kitchen that was mine and Irene's, and I think about all the years I spent building something so that my son would have something to carry, and I feel the full weight of how that turned out. But I also think about Terrence sitting across from me at a coffee shop in Burnaby 2 years ago, listening carefully while I told him something felt wrong. I think about the trust document in the drawer of my nightstand, every night for 14 months, keeping me steady. I think about those 6 hours of assessment, sitting quietly and telling the truth, knowing the truth was enough. They thought they had taken everything. They had taken 14 months, and a living room wall I liked, and whatever belief I had left that my son was the man I raised him to be. Everything else was exactly where I had put it.